And then you try to organize the next notes. And so it seems to me like instead of searching what most of the 20th century got lost into post-tonalism, is not to
That's
escape
putting it
tonalism.
lightly.
It, the world is not about escaping tonalism. It's about inhabiting it with your own personality. And that's why nobody told Rachmaninoff, it's about time that you give up writing like
Oh,
Chopin.
that is such a
Uh,
great topic. And this is a great topic. You brought up a really huge topic that, I mean, there is indeed, I think, an enormous pressure if you are a young composition student to push the boundaries, to do something weird, unlistenable. Nobody's going to listen to it. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, I'm not a big fan of all of this kind of serialistic music, atonal music. I just don't like it. But I mean, how do we tackle this topic? It's a huge topic, right? Let me just bring up one thing. I was thinking about this thought today. I want you to react to it. Pierre Boulez, your teacher said it. He was a genius, and I think he was. And I'm a Catholic. I think he was given gifts by God that were like he. I think he was natural, like you. I think given incredible gifts, and how you use those gifts, I think, is just is a distinction. There's a distinction there. So you can actually be a genius, but I heard his the atonal what's it, the second piano sonata. Not something I would listen to for fun, I mean, but I can recognize that a genius could create something like this. But again, it's like I can think of an analogy with philosophy. There's Hegel and Aquinas, and both of them are geniuses. I don't agree with anything about Hegel, and I pretty much agree more with Aquinas. But I can understand the distinction that they're both geniuses. And I wonder, Emile, I would love. You're a very eloquent person. Let's talk about this age in the 21st century. I mean, a lot of young, talented, clearly young, the future geniuses. Is it a mistake if we push them into this post-tonal world when there is, like you were talking about, is there more music to be written in C major?
I think that by essence, creators hear what others don't. And therefore, if it's reminiscent of something else, then people frame them. And if that is the case, then the case is closed. But what happens is that you don't choose when you appear in the history of life solution. So if you and I met in the 12th century in Flanders, or we meet in another place in Asia in the 23rd century, of course, our perception, awareness contextually of the music of the past or the music of the time is very different. Until almost the beginning of the 20th century, all the music that was played, written for church or non-church purposes, was the music of the time. There was very little knowledge and awareness of the music of their own past. And I find that the publishing companies and the recording companies have gangrened the conservatories to become this kind of system where we produce constantly the reality of a past. So we have to give, as a piano teacher, when I have a student playing a Chopin ballade, I have to find a way to bring them to an inner soundscape that responds to what is the texture of the time, the contextual texture of the time. Well, they played on an instrument that has nothing to do with it, where they have a psychology that is not theirs. The impatience, the longing, the expectation, what types of readings you do, or what kinds of thinkings you do. So, of course, somebody like Boulez was not only a genius, but he was a leader in terms of an intellectual leader, just like Schoenberg was. The problem is not with the leaders, is with the followers. Because some people choose to follow blindly because they want to be part of this group and or this master, and it becomes a chapel where the others are rejected. And I remember Boulez writing very critically about Stravinsky's neoclassical period. Now, I grew up to, when I was a child already, to say I like, I don't like all of us do. And my teacher specifically at the very get-go told me, don't say you don't like, tell yourself I don't understand first. Then go to it later, because some pieces cannot reveal themselves to you. The awareness that you have to receive is basically like develop your antennas to reach other things. The problem with the post-tonal music is that it's very often a system that justifies itself by the language, not by the essence. And so for those composers who write post-tonal language, genuinely, I think is wrong, regardless if you are listening to it and you're lost. But the more major problem is that if you hear a music that is tonally constructed, then it refers you to everything you have heard before. So then, as Mademoiselle Boulanger would say, the bad music of the past was at least boring at most. Today, it's unlistenable. So in order to
what was her opinion on post-tonal music? What did she think of it?
What she thought about it is that very few are genuinely inspired by it. And most of it is used by people who have little to say or nothing to say in music, who use idiom or that know-how in order to exist, but without a substance. Because if you use the common language, you'll see that they're empty. But when they complicate the things intellectually, then you're so flabbergasted because you don't know what it is or means. Therefore, you give up. So I would say that she was a very close friend of Stravinsky through his transformational styles. And when he reached his dodecaphonic style later in his life, when he was against it earlier in his life, when he went into the neoclassical, she always said that he was genuine in every style he was exploring. But she still preferred his earlier works from the Russian period.
What did she think of Schoenberg? Because if Arnold Schoenberg was, I mean, he wrote some fantastic late romantic works, that very listenable, and then he was kind of the leader of the Second Viennese School, and so what did she think of Schoenberg?
I think that she thought about the 12-tone system as an alienation because it locks its world within instead of being an open world to different styles. And she was very interested in the music of the very old, at the time, we talk early 70s, about the music of pre-Renaissance.
Oh.
And she's the one Monteverdi and shoots to recordings, which was never done before. And she was encouraging Copland and Francais and other of her students of the time, Markevich, to compose their music. So she used to say that contemporary music and very old music are equally disturbing because they're equally challenging us. The problem very often is that when a composer like Boulez or a composer like Schoenberg, besides their compositions, become theoreticians and cult leaders of a point of view that they decide. But it is true that very few composers of the past were deeply aware of the music of their past. In other words, How much did Schoenberg or Chopin or Stravinsky know about the music of Hildegard von Bingen? Probably nothing. It doesn't make Chopin a lesser good composer, etc. And I think that in this century, especially now, where the music schools encourage a lot of study of the past, even through the instruments of the past, reconstructions and all, we end up having these very specialized people who do contemporary ensembles or Baroque music ensembles or Renaissance ensembles. And you have these scholars that are very, very knowledgeable in these specifics. And then when you try to be sort of, as a pianist, for instance, encompassing it on your instrument for music that necessarily didn't have a keyboard instrument to be written for, but you play it on the piano as an instrument of trade, then you become an unserious musician to the eyes of the specialists. But at least now we have this plethora of specialists, of plethora of time periods. Whenever until Brahms's death in the beginning of the 20th century, they mostly knew the music of their immediate time. For Brahms, Beethoven, and Bach were the greatest ones. And so, would it have had changed anything for Brahms to have known more about music before him? Of course, he couldn't chronologically know the music after him. I recall about your question a letter of Poulenc to Louise de Villemorin, where he attended the prayer of Boulez's piano sonata in the hall. And he wrote to her in a letter, I never imagined music could go in that direction. And the fact is that when he wrote in 1949 his violin and piano sonata, he wrote to her, I'm going to write a violin and piano sonata which won't be for diva and harp, but for two equal instruments. And so I was thinking, there is always a need for a composer to state something against something else, either because I am against neoclassicism and I am Boulez, or I'm against dodecaphonic music and I want to write only tonal music like Jean Francais did until his death in 97, very old. You could argue that all these people were stubborn because some of them were aware that music had gone in different branches, but it didn't let them develop it in that direction, as I mentioned earlier about Rachmaninoff. And so when you listen to their music today, or you study their music today, or you write about their music today, of course, chronologically, you place them somewhere in time and in space, obviously. But ultimately, you listen to the Greek concerto for what it is, and the Rachmaninoff concerto for what it is, and you don't compare what was written at the same time, because then you get lost and you think, so was Brahms more old-fashioned, writing his last intermezzi at the end of the 20th century, or Debussy more modernistic, writing at the same years his early Image to be the 1897 one? And so you can say, oh, the one was avant-garde, the other one was old-guard. That's not true. I don't think that one should think like that. And my teacher always taught me to discover, rediscover, sometimes go back to some things I thought I don't like. And it takes a lifetime. And some don't come up, and some become more meaningful to you because you have different venues to enter in their music worlds. Basically, it seems to me like the tonal system was a common language, and the post-tonal system is a language for each composer. And so in order to world of a given composer and to appreciate all what he or she comes up with, you have to learn their language. So you cannot read a novel in translation because it makes no sense. Therefore, you have to learn the language of the novel you're going to read. And so it takes you years before you can read it.